the only one that had made enough sales. A construction engineer went from $1.5 million construction job that he was on in Alabama to a $15.5 million construction job in the Midwest before the end of the class was over. This was a 12-week class. A housewife won an all-expense-paid trip abroad. One couple in the class received an unexpected inheritance running into thousands of dollars. One man's heart condition disappeared. A widow of 20 years remarried happily. Several marriages were saved. One couple that had been divorced even remarried again. At least 2 people became millionaires as a result of that class. Now, we found that all kinds of things happened. There was increased health, there was increased wealth, there was increased happiness, there was increased peace of mind. The thing I noticed the most was that whereas the people had been depressed and discouraged at the beginning of that class, they seemed to blossom forth with a new look as the class progressed. They gained a new lease on life. It was an amazing thing to watch. The results of that class were so gratifying that the people in it asked me to write a book on prosperity. And I hesitated because at that time I'd written articles, but I had no experience in writing books. And I did not feel that I had the time either. But when I hesitated, a businessman in the class suggested that he begin meeting with me every day and that we meditate upon these ideas together, talk about them, and just let them expand. And so as we began to meet every day and meditate upon these ideas of prosperity, the whole format for this book developed to me in meditation and just in thinking about it. Now, a stockbroker in the class named this book The Dynamic Laws of Prosperity. And then it was a public relations man in that class who found the literary agent who found the publisher for the book. Now, not only was I surprised how fast the people in that prosperity class got results, but I was also startled by what happened to the people who worked closely with me while I was writing the book later. And some of you know this story because I've talked about it in some of my books. I employed a secretary who worked with me on the outline in the first half of this book. She was typing it. And when she had finished one half of the book, she came into my office one day and she said, "I'm resigning." And I said, "Well, what's wrong?" And she said, "Nothing's wrong. That's the reason I'm resigning. I don't need this job anymore. I've been using the ideas in this book and they've worked." And what had happened, her husband, her husband was a salesman, and his sales had been low as a result of the recession. And so she had taken the job to get extra things that they wanted, like a second car and things for their home and so on. And after she started typing the manuscript on Dynamic Laws of Prosperity, she began to rather quietly and secretly use the ideas. And all of a sudden, her husband's income began to go up. He began to sell, and his income began to go up. And then she had several gifts come to her, and in various ways, money began to come, and suddenly she just didn't need the job anymore. They got the second car and so on. And so she resigned. And so very innocently then, I employed a second secretary to help me work on the last half of this book. And she began to type it as I was working on it chapter by chapter over a period of weeks. And I vow to you, before she finished typing the last half of the book, she came into my office one day, and it was like a broken record. She said, "I'm resigning." And I said, "Well, what's wrong?" And she said, "Well, nothing's wrong." She said, "I've been using the ideas in that manuscript, and they've worked so well that I don't need this job anymore." And what had happened was her husband had been a very fine engineer in the aircraft business, and he had gotten laid off because of termination of government contracts as a result of the recession. And so she had taken